Chicago does not slow down for anyone. 41 floors below, the city moves the way it always moves, relentless, indifferent, magnificent. Taxis cut through the November dark. Steam rises from iron grates in the sidewalk. 1,000 lit windows hold 1,000 ordinary lives. None of them watching the man sitting alone at the glass. Pull closer. A penthouse, immaculate, silent in the way that expensive things are silent, not peaceful, but empty. Architectural drawings on the walls. Awards on a shelf no one visits. A photograph on a desk. Face down. Closer still. A man, 71, silver beard, hands that were built for drawing and have drawn nothing in 7 years. He is looking at a building across the skyline, a building he designed. A building being finished without him, and his expression holds something that has no clean name. Not sadness. Something older than sadness. Then, from somewhere below in the city, carried up through 41 floors of cold October air. A song. And everything begins to change.
He had built 43 buildings in his lifetime. Hospitals where strangers took their first breath. Libraries where children discovered who they wanted to become. Office towers that still caught the morning light in ways that made people stop on the sidewalk and look up. Harlan Greer had designed all of them. And on a Tuesday morning in October, he sat alone in his penthouse on the 41st floor of a building he did not design, watching a crane swing steel beams into place across the Chicago skyline. And he felt nothing. That was the thing nobody warned you about. Not the wheelchair, not the silence after Eleanor died, not even the way certain rooms in the apartment still smelled faintly like her perfume 2 years later in ways he couldn't explain and didn't want to investigate too closely. No, the thing nobody warned you about was the nothing, the mornings that arrived and asked nothing of you, the coffee that got cold on the windowsill because you forgot to drink it, the days that ended without a single moment you could point to and say that mattered. That was real. Harlan was 71 years old. He had a full head of silver hair, a beard he trimmed every Sunday out of habit rather than vanity, and hands that still knew how to hold a drafting pencil, even if he hadn't picked one up in 7 years. He had 17 architectural awards on a shelf in the hallway that nobody visited. He had a son in New York who called on birthdays and holidays and sometimes not even then. And he had a view of a building being finished without him. That building across the skyline, the one with the curved glass facade that caught the October sun like a prism, he had sketched the first concept for it in the spring of 2017. He'd been 64 then, still at his firm, still walking into his office every morning with the particular energy of a man who believed his best work was still ahead of him. The accident had happened in June of that same year. A wet road, a truck that didn't stop. 3 seconds that rewrote everything. He didn't remember the impact. He remembered the smell of rain on hot asphalt. He remembered Eleanor's voice on the phone just before she'd called to ask if he wanted salmon or chicken for dinner, which was such an ordinary question that it broke his heart every time he thought about it. Then nothing. Then a hospital ceiling. Then a doctor's face telling him, with the careful gentleness of someone who had delivered this news before, that he would not walk again. Eleanor had been there for all of it, for the first year when rage was the only emotion that felt proportionate to what had been taken from him, for the second year when the rage burned itself out and left something quieter and heavier in its place, for the years after that when Harlan slowly rebuilt the architecture of a life that looked different than the one he'd planned. She had sat beside his drafting table in the apartment while he worked from his chair. She had rearranged the kitchen so everything was within reach. She had never once, not once in 5 years, made him feel diminished. Eleanor died on a Thursday in November 2 years ago. Heart failure sudden and complete in the early hours before dawn. Harlan had been asleep in the next room. He had not heard her go. That was the part he lived with. After she was gone, the apartment changed. It didn't change physically. Everything was still where it had always been, still accessible, still exactly as she had arranged it. But the rooms became larger somehow, louder in their silence. The kitchen especially. He had stood in that kitchen on the morning of her funeral and looked at a cabinet she had lowered 6 inches so he could reach it easily, and he had understood in a way that no grief counselor had been able to explain to him exactly what loss meant. It meant that someone had spent 5 years quietly building a world that worked for you, and now you were living in that world without them. Clifton Oakes had been calling him every week since the funeral. Clifton was 67, Harlan's former partner at the firm, a man with wire-rimmed glasses and the patient manner of someone who had spent 4 decades listening to clients describe what they wanted and then gently explaining what they actually needed. He and Harlan had worked together for 30 years. They had fought over floor plans and laughed over bad coffee and stood together at more ribbon cuttings than either of them could count. After the accident, Clifton had stepped in to manage the firm. After Eleanor died, Clifton started calling every Thursday. Not to talk about work, just to call. Harlan appreciated it more than he ever said out loud. It was Clifton who convinced him to attend the gala. The Eleanor Greer Architecture Scholarship that had been Harlan's idea established 6 months after she died a way to put her name on something that would last. The annual fundraiser was held at the Chicago Art Institute, and it was by all accounts a genuinely good event. Young architects presenting work, music, the kind of room where people who cared about beautiful things gathered together and reminded each other why beauty mattered. Harlan had not attended the first one. He had sent a check and stayed home. He had not attended the second one either. But Clifton had made a different argument this year. He hadn't pushed. He hadn't insisted. He had simply said quietly over the phone on a Thursday evening, "She would have liked to see you there, Harlan. Not for the scholarship, just there, in the room, among people." Harlan had sat with that for a long moment. Then he had said he would think about it. Then on the evening of the gala, he had put on the charcoal suit Eleanor had always liked, the one that still hung in the closet with the dry cleaning tag still attached from the last time she'd had it pressed, and he had gone. The Art Institute was lit warmly against the October dark. Harlan arrived late by intention. Late enough that the crowd had settled, the first round of drinks had been circulated, the formal greetings were done. Late enough that he could move through the room without becoming an event himself. He was good at that, moving through rooms without making them stop. The wheelchair helped in a strange way. People were so determined not to stare that they ended up looking away entirely, which suited him fine. He had learned over 7 years that invisibility had its own kind of utility. Clifton met him near the entrance, handed him a glass of sparkling water, and said nothing except, "Good, you're here." The room was exactly what Harlan had expected. The kind of event Eleanor would have loved. The flower arrangement slightly overstated, the string quartet playing something from Ravel in the far corner, the lighting designed to make everyone look a little more distinguished than they actually were. Young architects in groups near the display boards, their voices bright with the particular energy of people who still believed. The best ideas hadn't been thought of yet. Harlan remembered being that age. He found a position near the east windows, looking out over Michigan Avenue, and let the evening move around him. Clifton circulated. That was Clifton's gift, moving through rooms, easily making each person feel briefly like the most important one there. Harlan watched him work and felt something that wasn't quite pride and wasn't quite longing. Something in between. The scholarship had funded 11 students in 3 years. Harlan knew their names. He had read every application, though he had told Clifton he was only reviewing the finalists. The work was good. Some of it was more than good. There was a young woman from Cincinnati who was designing adaptive housing for wheelchair users, buildings that didn't announce themselves as accessible buildings that simply worked for everyone, and her portfolio had made Harlan sit quietly for a long time. Eleanor would have put that portfolio on the refrigerator. He was thinking about that, about Eleanor in the refrigerator, in the specific way she celebrated other people's work when Vivian Hartwell appeared beside him. He knew Vivian, not well but sufficiently. She had been part of Eleanor's world, the luncheons and gallery openings and charity committees that Eleanor had navigated with genuine warmth and that Harlan had attended with genuine effort. Vivian was elegant in the way of women who had worked hard at elegance for many decades. Silver hair swept upward, a dark green dress that was exactly right for the evening. She approached him with what looked like genuine feeling, and Harlan, to his own mild surprise, found himself grateful for it. "Harlan," she said, "I'm so glad you came." They talked about Eleanor. That was the unexpected gift of the first few minutes. Vivian had known Eleanor at college before Harlan had ever met her, and she told a story about Eleanor in the spring of 1975 that he had never heard. Eleanor at 22, standing on a table in a dining hall in Wisconsin, reading a poem aloud because she had lost a bet and refused to be embarrassed about it. Laughing, completely unafraid. Harlan listened to this story and felt Eleanor alive in it for a few seconds. That was the gift. Then Vivian said she had a small request. She had been involved, she explained, with a foundation that supported arts education in underfunded schools. A wonderful cause. She had been thinking, and she hoped he wouldn't mind her asking, that one of Harlan's original architectural sketches, perhaps something from an early project, would make a remarkable auction item, the kind of thing serious collectors would pay well for. Harlan nodded slowly. What foundation is this? Vivian named it. The Hartwell Arts Initiative. Her own name. Her own foundation. Harlan looked at her for a moment. She met his eyes steadily, and he could see that she believed in what she was doing. That was the complicated part. She wasn't cynical exactly. She was simply the kind of person who had never clearly distinguished between her own interests and the interests of others. He said quietly, "I'll think about it," which was his way of saying no. Vivian understood. The warmth in her expression cooled by precisely 3 degrees, he could measure it, and she excused herself with a gracious smile and moved back into the room. Harlan turned back to the window. This was the thing he had not been able to explain to anyone, not even Clifton. It wasn't that people were unkind. They weren't. Most people most of the time were reasonably decent. They said the right things. They showed up. They meant well in the approximate way that people meant well at events like this. But every interaction had a shape to it, a beginning and a middle and an end that you could see coming from the first sentence. And after 71 years of conversations, after 40 years of listening to clients tell him what they wanted from a building, Harlan had become very good at recognizing the shape of a conversation before it finished. Nobody surprised him anymore. He was wondering with the particular loneliness of someone who has just articulated a thing clearly for the first time whether anyone ever would again when he heard the music change. The string quartet had shifted. They were playing something different now, something slower. A melody that moved through the room like a change in light. Harlan went still. He knew that song, La Vie en Rose. He had not heard it played live since 1978, since a small reception hall in Wisconsin. Eleanor in a dress the color of cream, her hair pinned up with 2 small flowers that had come slightly loose by the end of the evening. The band had played this song, and Eleanor had pulled him onto the dance floor, and he had said he couldn't dance. And she had said that didn't matter, and it hadn't. He sat by the window and listened to the melody move through the room, and he did not notice the small figure that had appeared beside him until she spoke. "Do you know what this song is called?" He turned. She was perhaps 5 years old, dark curly hair that had been put up in 2 uneven braids, a dress that was clean and simple and slightly too small, the sleeves coming to just above her wrists. She was looking up at him with the direct, completely unself-conscious attention that only very young children have, the kind of looking that doesn't know it's supposed to glance away. She was not looking at the wheelchair. She was looking at him. "Do you know what it's called?" she asked again, not impatient, genuinely curious. Harlan looked at her for a long moment. "Why do you want to know?" "Because I like it," she said, as if this were the most obvious reason in the world. "Mama hums it sometimes when she thinks I'm sleeping. I like it when she hums." Harlan was quiet. Around them, the gala moved and murmured. Glasses clinked. Someone laughed at something across the room. The quartet played on. "It's called La Vie en Rose," Harlan said finally. "It's French." The girl considered this seriously. "What does it mean, life in pink?" he said. "Or life seen through rose-colored light? Life looking beautiful." She thought about this. "Like when the sun is setting and everything goes orange." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "Exactly like that." She nodded, satisfied. Then she looked at the wheelchair with the same direct curiosity she had brought to everything else. "Does that go fast?" "Fast enough," Harlan said. "Cool," she said simply. And then she turned and looked back out at the room, standing beside him at the window, apparently content to simply exist there, the 2 of them watching the gala together as if they had always planned to spend the evening this way. Harlan did not know what to say, so he said nothing. And it was improbably the most comfortable silence he had sat in for 2 years. He heard the woman before he saw her. A quick, breathless marigold said in the tone of someone who has been searching and is simultaneously relieved and horrified to have found what they were looking for. The girl Marigold apparently turned around. The woman was in her mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, a uniform that identified her as part of the catering staff. She was moving toward them with the particular speed of someone who is trying to move quickly without running, and her expression was the expression of a person calculating the fastest possible way to apologize to a powerful stranger. "I am so sorry," she said, reaching them, her voice low and controlled, but her eyes carrying the full weight of her anxiety. She was supposed to stay in the back. She knows she's supposed to stay in the back. "Marigold, what did I tell you?" "The music was pretty, Mama." "I know, sweetheart, but the man knows what it's called. It's French." The woman looked at Harlan. She was preparing for anger. He could see it, the slight brace of her shoulders, the careful neutrality she was putting on her face, the readiness. Harlan looked at her. Then he looked at Marigold. Then he looked back at the woman. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated. Nora Calloway." "Ms. Calloway," Harlan said, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to take a moment before you answer." Her expression shifted. She clearly hadn't expected that. "The song they're playing," he said. "Do you know the name of it?" Nora blinked. She listened for a moment. Something moved across her face, recognition, and then something softer than recognition. "La Vie en Rose," she said quietly. "Edith Piaf." Harlan nodded slowly. "My wife loved that song," he said. "We danced to it at our wedding in 1978. I have not heard it played live since that night. And I realized sitting here that I had somehow forgotten the name of it." He paused. "Your daughter reminded me." Nora stood very still. "She didn't do anything wrong," Harlan said. "She asked me a question, and I'm glad she did." Nora looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Marigold. The girl was watching her mother with the calm, observant attention of a child who understands more than people give her credit for. "Thank you," Nora said finally. Her voice had changed. The careful neutrality was gone. What was underneath it was something more real, quiet and tired and genuine. "Thank you for being kind," she said. Harlan looked back out at the room. The quartet was finishing the song. The last notes of La Vie en Rose moved through the air and dissolved into the sound of conversation and clinking glass and the ordinary continuous noise of people gathered together in a warm room on a cold October night. "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" he asked. 3 years, Nora said. "Since Mari was 2. "Long hours." "Yes." He glanced at her. "Is there someone else for her during the day?" A brief pause. "Not always. Tonight the sitter canceled." Harlan nodded. He didn't ask more. He understood the shape of what she wasn't saying. Marigold had pressed herself against her mother's side now, one hand holding the fabric of Nora's uniform, watching Harlan with those direct, unafraid eyes. "She really just walked up to you," Nora said. She sounded partly mortified and partly something else. "She walked up to the window and stood beside me," Harlan said. "And she asked if I knew the name of the song. That was it." "She does that," Nora said quietly. "She just walks up to people. She doesn't see the things she's supposed to see first." Harlan looked down at Marigold. He understood with sudden clarity what Nora meant. What Marigold hadn't seen first. What everyone else in this room had seen first. The wheelchair. The age. The signals that were supposed to mean approach with caution, adjust your manner, manage the interaction. Marigold had seen none of it. She had seen a man by a window who might know the name of a song. "That's not a flaw," Harlan said. Nora looked at him. "That's not a flaw," he said again. "What she does, that's not something to correct." Nora was quiet for a moment, then softly, "I know." Harlan left the gala 40 minutes later. He did not speak to anyone else. He said goodnight to Clifton near the coat check. Clifton asked if he was all right, and Harlan said yes, and it was true in a way it hadn't been true when he arrived. In the car going home, the city moving past the windows in long streaks of amber and white, Harlan sat with his hands folded in his lap and thought about the evening. He thought about Vivian Hartwell and the shape of that conversation and how quickly he had seen the end of it coming. He thought about the building across the skyline, the one being finished without him. He thought about Eleanor at 22 standing on a table in a dining hall in Wisconsin, reading a poem aloud because she had lost a bet and refused to be embarrassed about it. And he thought about a 5-year-old girl standing beside him at a window, looking out at a crowded room, perfectly content to simply be there. Do you know what this song is called? Such a small question. He had sat in a room full of architects and philanthropists, and the kind of people who attended events like this. People with intentions and agendas and carefully managed presentations of themselves. And the only moment that had felt completely real was 4 minutes with a child who didn't know she was supposed to look away first. Back in the penthouse, he moved through the dark apartment without turning on the lights. He had learned every inch of it. He could navigate it in darkness and silence in whatever weather his mind was making. He stopped in the kitchen. There was a cabinet above the counter lowered 6 inches. Eleanor had done that, had arranged it quietly one afternoon while he was working and hadn't mentioned it, and he had noticed that evening and not said anything either, because some things between people who have been married for a long time don't require words. He put his hand flat against the cabinet door. He stood there for a moment in the dark kitchen, his hand on the cabinet she had moved for him, listening to the city 41 floors below. Then he went to his desk and opened the top drawer. Inside, under a folder of old correspondence, was a photograph. Eleanor at the wedding, 1978. The dress the color of cream. The two small flowers in her hair slightly loose. Her eyes looking at someone just off frame, looking at him. The young man he had been, who was probably saying something foolish because he was nervous, intended to talk too much when he was nervous. She was laughing. He had kept that photograph in the drawer for 2 years because he could not decide whether looking at it helped or hurt, and he had found that uncertainty easier to manage than making a decision. He looked at it now. La vie en rose. Life seen through rose-colored light. Life looking beautiful. He put the photograph back carefully, closed the drawer, and sat for a long time in the dark. He did not know yet what he was going to do. But something in the architecture of the evening had shifted. Something small and structural, the way a single changed beam can alter how light moves through an entire building. He would not have been able to explain it. He knew only that when he finally went to sleep that night, it was the first night in 2 years that he did not lie awake listening to the size of the apartment. 3 days after the gala, Harlan called Clifton. Not on a Thursday, on a Monday morning early before the city had fully started. "I want to find out who runs the catering crew for the Art Institute events," he said. Clifton was quiet for a moment. "May I ask why?" "There was a woman working the gala, Nora Calloway. I want to find out how to reach her." Another pause. "Harlan." "It's not what you're thinking," Harlan said. "I want to offer her a position." "A position doing what?" "Managing the apartment, the household." Clifton was quiet for a longer moment this time. "You've had offers like this before," he said carefully. "From the agency. You turned them all down." "I know. What's different?" Harlan thought about how to answer that. He thought about the wheelchair and the stickers he hadn't imagined yet. He thought about the quiet in the apartment and the cabinet in the kitchen and the photograph in the desk drawer. He thought about a small girl standing at a window, perfectly comfortable beside a stranger, asking a completely simple question with complete seriousness. "She has a daughter," Harlan said finally, 5 years old, called Marigold. "And I want her to bring Marigold with her." A long pause. "Every day," Harlan added. "That's the condition, not a preference. The condition." Clifton absorbed this. "All right," he said. "Can you find her contact information?" "Probably by noon." "Good." He hung up and sat for a moment looking out at the Chicago skyline. The crane across the way was moving again, steel swinging slowly through the pale October sky. The building almost finished. Harlan watched it for a while. Then he went to the desk drawer and took out the photograph again. Eleanor at the wedding, laughing at something he'd said. He propped it against the lamp where he could see it. That was the first change. Small and structural, the kind that alters how light moves through a room. There would be others. He didn't know that yet. But he was for the first time in a long time willing to find out. The call came on a Wednesday. Nora was in the laundry room of her building in Southside, transferring a load of Mari's clothes from the washer to the dryer when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. A 312 area code. Chicago proper. She almost didn't answer. She answered. The voice on the other end was measured and unhurried, low in the way of men who had learned over a long time that they didn't need to raise their voices to be heard. He introduced himself, said he had gotten her number through the catering agency, said he hoped that wasn't an intrusion. Nora leaned against the washing machine and said it wasn't. He told her he was looking for someone to manage his household. Not cleaning in the traditional sense, he had a service for that. What he needed was someone consistent, someone present, someone who understood how to run a home that had over the past 2 years gradually stopped functioning like one. He named a salary. Nora said nothing for a moment because the number he named was more than she made in a month of evening shifts. Then he told her the condition. She could bring Marigold. Every day. It wasn't optional he wanted Mari there. That was part of the arrangement, not an accommodation of it. Nora stood in the laundry room and looked at the dryer turning and thought about all the mornings she had dropped Mari at a neighbor's house before dawn, leaving her asleep on a couch that wasn't hers. She thought about the sitter who had canceled the night of the gala and the 4 other times that same sitter had canceled in the past 3 months. She thought about the particular exhaustion of being the only person responsible for another person's entire world. She said she needed to think about it. He said, of course. Take a few days. She called back the next morning. The first day Nora arrived at the penthouse with Mari's hand in hers and a canvas bag over her shoulder in the careful posture of someone walking into a place they're not entirely sure they belong. The elevator opened directly into the foyer. Harlan was already there. He was sitting in the wheelchair near the window, a cup of coffee on the table beside him, and he looked, she noticed this immediately, like a man who had been awake for some time. Not in a troubled way, in the way of someone whose mind starts early and keeps its own schedule. He looked at Mari. Mari looked at him. Then she looked past him at the apartment, at the enormous windows, in the skyline beyond them, at the bookshelves that ran floor to ceiling on the far wall, at the framed architectural drawings that hung in clusters throughout the room. And her eyes went wide in the specific way that children's eyes go wide when they have just discovered that the world is significantly larger than they had previously understood. She turned to Nora. Mama, there are so many books. I see that, Nora said carefully. Can I look? Nora started to answer, but Harlan spoke first. You can look at anything in this room, he said. Just tell me if you find one you want to read. Mari looked at him for a moment, assessing this. Then she nodded with great seriousness and walked toward the bookshelves. Harlan watched her go. Something in his expression shifted the way light shifts in a room when someone opens a window. Nora said, thank you for being patient with her. She doesn't require patience, Harlan said. She requires attention. Those are different things. Nora looked at him. He nodded toward the kitchen. There's fresh coffee. The cups are in the cabinet to the left of the stove, the lower one. Eleanor had it lowered. He said his wife's name naturally without the careful deliberateness of someone managing grief. Just the name, just the fact. Nora went to the kitchen and found the cabinet and poured a cup of coffee and stood at the counter for a moment, listening to the apartment. From the living room, she could hear Mari talking to herself quietly, which was what Mari always did when she was exploring somewhere new. A running commentary of observations not directed at anyone, just the sound of a small person making sense of a large world. Nora exhaled slowly. For the first time in a long time, she thought this might be all right. The days built on each other the way days do when something is working. Nora learned the apartment methodically. She learned which windows let in the morning light and which ones rattled in the November wind. She learned that Harlan took his coffee black before 10 and with a small amount of cream after. She learned that he preferred silence in the mornings and conversation in the afternoons, and that the distinction mattered to him in a way that wasn't rudeness. It was just the rhythm of a man who had lived alone long enough to know what he needed. She learned that he read constantly history, mostly, in architecture, and occasionally novels that he held as if they were structural documents requiring careful analysis. She learned that he kept a photograph on the desk now propped against the lamp. She had noticed it the second day and had not said anything about it because some things in a home are not yours to comment on. Mari, for her part, required no learning period whatsoever. By the third day, she had memorized the names of 17 buildings visible from the living room windows, which Harlan had told her one afternoon while she stood beside his chair pointing at each one. By the fourth day, she had selected a book from the lower shelf, a large illustrated volume about bridges, and had taken to sitting on the rug near Harlan's chair each afternoon while he read turning pages with the slow deliberateness of someone who is not yet reading the words, but is having a very serious relationship with the pictures. Harlan watched this without comment, but Nora noticed that he began positioning his chair slightly differently in the afternoons. Not at the desk, closer to the rug. The stickers happened on a Tuesday 3 weeks in. Mari had a sheet of them in her bag, the kind sold for $1 at the corner pharmacy, a mix of stars and flowers and cartoon animals and colors that had no business existing in the same visual field. She had been carrying them for days, apparently waiting for the right application. She approached Harlan's wheelchair while he was reading and stood looking at it for a long moment with the evaluative expression of someone sizing up a creative project. "Can I put stickers on this?" she asked. Harlan looked up from his book. He looked at the wheelchair. He looked at Mari. He looked at the sheet of stickers, a hot pink flower, a yellow star, a small, smiling sun. "Where?" he asked. She pointed to the side panel, the part that faced outward when he moved through a room. "Right there," she said, "so people can see them." Harlan was quiet for a moment. The wheelchair had cost more than most cars. It was custom-built matte black, the product of considerable engineering and considerable expense. It was also the thing that announced him in every room he entered before he said a single word. He looked at Mari. "All right," he said. She applied the stickers with great seriousness, tongue slightly out, small hands pressing each one flat, smoothing the edges. A pink flower, a gold star, a green turtle that she explained was there because turtles were very good at carrying things on their back and still being okay. Harlan said that was a reasonable observation. When she was finished, she stepped back to assess her work. "Better," she said. Harlan looked down at the side panel of his wheelchair, at the pink flower, and the gold star and the green turtle, and something moved across his face that Nora, watching from the kitchen doorway, could not quite name. Not quite amusement. Not quite grief. Something in between that looked from a distance very much like the beginning of something. There was an evening in late November when the power went out. A transformer failure 2 blocks over. The building switched to emergency lighting, a dim amber that turned the penthouse into something that felt smaller and warmer and more like a place where people actually lived. Nora found candles in a drawer in the kitchen. Eleanor had kept them there, apparently, along with a box of long matches. She lit 3 and set them on the coffee table. Mari was delighted. She had never eaten dinner by candlelight and treated it as an occasion of significant importance, sitting very straight and speaking in a slightly lower voice as if candles required formality. The 3 of them ate soup that Nora had made from whatever was in the refrigerator, something with tomatoes and white beans and a handful of thyme she'd found in a small pot on the kitchen windowsill that she hadn't noticed before. "Eleanor grew that," Harlan said when he saw her looking at the pot. "She had 6 of them along the windowsill. Herbs, thyme, rosemary, basil. I only managed to keep the thyme alive." Nora said she thought that was something. "Not really," Harlan said. "Thyme is hard to kill." But he said it without bitterness, more like a man making an honest accounting. They ate in the candlelight, and Mari told them a very detailed story about a 3-legged cat that belonged to the woman downstairs in their building in Southside, a tabby named something she couldn't pronounce, that the woman just called 3, which Mari thought was not a very dignified name for a cat who had clearly been through a lot. Harlan listened to this story with complete attention. He asked questions about the cat, about the woman downstairs, about the building and the neighborhood and the grocery store on the corner where Nora sometimes took Mari for a popsicle on Friday afternoons. He asked the way a man asks when he is genuinely interested, not to be polite, not to fill the silence, because he actually wanted to know. Nora had not been asked about her life, not like this, not with this quality of attention, in longer than she could easily remember. She talked, more than she intended to, about the building and the neighbor and the grocery store, yes, but also about Southside in the early mornings when the light came in low over the rooftops, and about the way Mari had started narrating everything she saw as they walked to the subway, a running description of the neighborhood delivered in the tone of a nature documentary narrator. Harlan smiled at that. Not the careful smile he had worn at the gala, the one that said, "I am present and engaged in managing this social interaction competently." A real smile, the kind that uses the eyes. The power came back on at 9:30. The overhead lights returned, the refrigerator resumed its hum, the city came back fully online. None of them moved to blow out the candles. They sat in the combined light, the electric and the flame, for another 20 minutes. And then Mari fell asleep against Nora's arm, and Harlan said goodnight in a voice that meant something specific without saying what it was, and Nora carried Mari to the elevator and went home. On the subway back to South Side, Mari sleeping against her shoulder, Nora stared out at the dark tunnel walls moving past the window and thought about the pot of time on the kitchen windowsill. I only managed to keep the time alive. She thought about what it meant to tend something, to keep something alive in a season when everything else had stopped growing. Clifton came by on a Thursday afternoon in December. He knocked, which Harlan apparently found unnecessary. He called out from the study to come in. Clifton let himself in with the ease of a man who had been walking into this apartment for years, nodded at Nora in the kitchen with the pleasant straightforwardness of someone who had already made up his mind about her, and went to find Harlan in the study. Mari was at the dining table working on a drawing. Clifton paused on his way past. "What are you making?" he asked. "A building," Mari said. She held it up. It was unmistakably a building, tall and rectangular with many windows, a front door, and what appeared to be a flag on the roof. "What's the flag for?" Clifton asked. "So people know someone's home," Mari said, as if this were obvious. Clifton looked at the drawing for a moment. Then he nodded and said that was a very good reason for a flag. Later, when he and Harlan were in the study with the door partially open, Nora could hear them talking. Not the words, just the register of it, low and unhurried. The sound of two men who had known each other long enough that silence between sentences didn't mean anything needed to be filled. At one point, she heard Harlan's voice, and then a pause, and then Clifton's voice, and whatever Clifton said made Harlan laugh, an actual full laugh, the kind that came from somewhere genuine. Nora stopped what she was doing for a moment. She had not heard him laugh like that before. She had heard the careful laugh he used in polite conversation, the one that acknowledged humor without fully committing to it. This was different. This was the sound of a man who had forgotten briefly to manage himself. She went back to what she was doing and said nothing about it. But she thought about it later. The question about school came on a Wednesday afternoon in early January. They were sitting in the living room, Harlan reading, Mari lying on her stomach on the rug, working her way through the large illustrated bridge book with great concentration. Outside, the first snow of the year was coming down in slow, deliberate flakes, settling on the windows and the ledges and the steel skeleton of the building across the way. Harlan looked up from his book. "Mari," he said, "how old are you?" "5, Wisham," Mari said without looking up. "When do you turn 6? "March the 14th. Harlan was quiet for a moment. "Do you go to school?" Mari turned a page. "Not right now." He looked at Nora. Nora set down the glass she was polishing and said carefully, "She did last year. A pre-K program. It was good. But the building we were in before, our old neighborhood, the school there was different. The one near us now has a waiting list. And the private programs—" She stopped. Harlan waited. "They're not within what I can manage right now," she said. Not with shame, just as a fact stated plainly in the manner of someone who had made peace with the facts of their life, even when the facts were difficult. Harlan looked back at Mari. Mari had stopped turning pages. She was listening. Children always listened. Nora knew they just didn't show it the same way adults did. "What's your favorite thing?" Harlan asked her. "To learn about." Mari thought about it seriously. "Bridges," she said, "and words and where rivers go." Harlan nodded slowly. "Those are related, you know. Bridges and rivers." Mari looked up. "How?" "Because bridges only exist where rivers are," he said. "The river comes first. The bridge is an answer to it." Mari stared at him. This was clearly something she intended to think about for a significant amount of time. Harlan looked at Nora. "I'd like to look into some options," he said, "for her schooling, if you're open to it." Nora opened her mouth. "Not a conversation for today," he said in a tone that was gentle and also not taking no for an answer. "Just would you be open to talking about it?" Nora looked at her daughter lying on the rug with the bridge book, thinking about rivers. "Yes," she said. "I'd be open to talking about it." What happened next surprised even Clifton. Harlan did not make phone calls on Mari's behalf. He did not pull strings or make donations that opened doors. He drove himself on a Tuesday morning to the Lakeview Academy, a private school 12 blocks from the penthouse, and asked to speak with the admissions director. The admissions director, a woman named Patricia Voss, who had been managing the wait list for that school for 11 years, came out to the lobby expecting a prospective grandparent with a checkbook. She found a man in a wheelchair with a gold star sticker on the side panel who explained that there was a 6-year-old girl in March who was particularly interested in Bridges Rivers and the relationship between them, and who he believed would be an asset to any classroom that was paying attention. Patricia Voss listened. She asked some questions. Harlan answered them. He did not mention his name in connection with any building or foundation or endowment. He mentioned Eleanor's name once when Patricia asked what had brought him to the school specifically. He said his wife had believed that good education was the most durable thing you could give a child, and he was trying to act accordingly. Patricia Voss went back to her office and looked at the wait list. She called Harlan 2 days later. There was a spot opening in the spring term. Nora cried when he told her. Not in front of him, she had turned toward the window, looking out at the lake in the January gray. But her shoulders shook, and when she turned back, her eyes were bright, and she said, "You didn't have to do that," in a voice that meant something closer to, "I don't know how to hold this." "I know," Harlan said. "That's why it was worth doing." Mari, for her part, received the news with a gravity appropriate to the occasion. "Will there be books?" she asked. Harlan said yes. "About Bridges?" He said he imagined they could find some. She nodded satisfied and went back to the rug. It was the homework, though, that turned something. March came, and with it the spring term, and with it Mari coming home each afternoon with a backpack that seemed slightly too large for her frame, and a full report on everything that had happened delivered in the running associative style of a child for whom no detail is too small to share. Harlan listened to every report. He asked questions about the other children, about the teachers, about the cafeteria, which Mari had strong opinions about in both directions. He helped with the reading exercises in the evenings, sitting at the dining table while Mari sounded out words, neither rushing her nor letting her give up. He turned math problems into architecture. If a building has 3 floors and each floor has 4 windows, how many windows does it have? If a bridge needs to be 40 feet long and each section is 8 feet, how many sections? Mari found this approach logical and effective, which it was also Nora understood the way Harlan had probably always thought. The instinct to make abstract things physical, to build a model of something so you could understand it. One afternoon in April, Mari came home with a project assignment. Social studies, draw your family. She sat at the dining table with her colored pencils and worked for 30 minutes with the focused silence of someone doing something important. When she was done, she held it up. Nora was on the left, holding Mari's left hand. Harlan was on the right, clearly in the wheelchair. The wheelchair represented with the gold star sticker on the side panel, holding Mari's right hand. Above them was a sun. Below the drawing, in her careful first-grade print, she had written "My family." Nora looked at the drawing for a long time. She looked at Harlan. He was looking at this drawing too, and his expression was the one she had seen that first day with the stickers, the one she had never quite found the right word for. He asked to be excused. He went to the study and closed the door. Not for long, 4 minutes, maybe 5. When he came back, his expression was composed, and he said nothing about it, and Nora said nothing about it. And they both understood that some things were too large to be held lightly enough for immediate discussion. That night, after Nora and Mari had gone home, Harlan went to the desk. He took out the photograph. Eleanor at the wedding laughing. He set the drawing next to it. Mari's family, the wheelchair with the gold star, the sun. He looked at both of them for a long time. Then he went to the kitchen and made himself a cup of tea and stood at the window watching the city below, thinking about rivers and bridges and the fact that a bridge only exists where a river already is. The river comes first. The bridge is the answer to it. He hadn't known when he sat in the dark at that window the night after the gala what the river was. He thought he might be beginning to understand. Preston Greer flew in from New York on a Friday evening in late April. Harlan knew he was coming. Preston had called 2 days before, which itself was unusual enough to be notable. The calls were typically on birthdays, on the anniversary of Eleanor's death, occasionally on a Sunday afternoon that felt like an obligation being managed from a distance. This call was different in tone. Careful. Preston said he had been thinking about coming to Chicago. He said he wanted to see Harlan. He did not say he'd heard about the household arrangement. But Harlan understood from the particular quality of his son's voice that someone had told him something. Preston arrived at 6 in the evening, still in the suit he had traveled in, the tie, slightly loosened. He was 44, dark-haired like his mother, the same height as Harlan before the accident. He had Eleanor's eyes, and when he forgot to manage himself, her laugh. He forgot less and less these days. They had dinner. Nora and Mari were still there when Preston arrived, and the introduction was careful in the way of introductions between strangers who already know something about each other. Preston shook Nora's hand with lawyer's courtesy, warm and controlled. Mari looked at him with her usual direct assessment, decided he was probably acceptable, and went back to the bridge book. Preston watched this. Then he watched Harlan watching Mari, and something moved behind his eyes that he didn't say out loud. He stayed for dinner. Nora cooked more than she had planned. She had noticed the extra place setting that Harlan had quietly added to the table without comment. The conversation was general. The city. Preston's work described in the broad terms of someone who wasn't really talking about the thing they'd come to talk about. After Nora and Mari left, the apartment shifted. The silence had a different quality. The particular silence of a room where a conversation is about to happen and both people in it know it. Preston stood at the window where Harlan often sat. "She seems good," he said. "The woman, Nora." "She is," Harlan said. "The little girl is something." "She is." Preston was quiet for a moment. "How long has this been going on?" "About 5 months." "And you're satisfied with the arrangement?" Harlan looked at his son. "I'm not going to pretend I don't hear what's underneath that question," Harlan said. "So ask the question you actually came to ask." Preston turned from the window. He was his mother's son in this way too. He didn't flinch from directness when it was offered. "I'm worried," he said. "I know how that sounds. I know you're 71 and you're perfectly capable of making your own decisions. I'm not questioning that. I'm just—" He stopped. "I'm worried," he said again. Harlan nodded. "About what, specifically?" Preston seemed to search for the honest answer. "About you getting attached to people you don't know well," he said. "About a situation that seems very fast, Dad. 5 months. A woman and her daughter living in this apartment every day. You're paying for the girls' school. I know what I'm doing," Harlan said. "I'm not saying you don't." "Preston," his son stopped. "When your mother died," Harlan said quietly, "I sat in this apartment for 8 months and spoke to almost no one. I had the cleaning service come. I had groceries delivered. I watched the building across the street being finished without me. I read books I don't remember. I went to sleep every night at 9 o'clock because sleep was the only thing that made the hours go faster." He paused. "That's what you're trying to protect me from," he said, "because you're about 5 months too late." Preston was silent. "I'm not angry at you," Harlan said. "I want you to understand that clearly, but I need you to understand what was here before Nora and that child arrived. And then I need you to look very carefully at what's here now and tell me which one of those things you think I should be worried about." Preston looked at his father. The silence between them was long. Not hostile, not resolved. Something more honest than either two men standing in a room where the real thing had finally been said, and neither of them sure yet what came next. Preston said he needed some air. He took his jacket and went out. He did not come back for 3 hours. When he returned, Harlan was in the study. Preston knocked on the open door and said he was going to stay in Chicago for the weekend if that was all right. Harlan said it was. Preston said goodnight and went to the guest room. The apartment was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that comes after something has moved, not the kind that comes from nothing happening. Harlan sat in the study for a long time. He was not afraid of what Preston was thinking. He was not afraid of what came next. He was thinking about something Nora had said once, not to him, to Mari, on a morning when Mari hadn't wanted to go to school. She had said, "The hard part is not the thing itself. The hard part is the moment right before you decide to walk toward it." He had heard that from the kitchen and had not let on that he'd heard it. He thought about it now. He thought about the weekend ahead, and Preston in the next room, and Nora arriving Monday morning with Mari's backpack in the morning's first question about whatever she had been thinking about since Friday. He thought about the river and the bridge and the space between them. Then he turned off the desk lamp and went to bed. In the morning, there would be more to figure out. There always was when something was actually worth figuring out. The penthouse was quiet in a way it hadn't been quiet in months. Not the old quiet. Not the quiet of 8 months alone after Eleanor died, the kind that had weight and texture and pressed against the walls like something looking for a way out. This was a different quiet, the kind that comes when something that was present is suddenly absent. When a room remembers what used to fill it. Harlan noticed it the moment he came back from his Monday appointment and found the apartment exactly as he had left it. Nora's cleaning supplies under the sink. Mari's bridge book on the low shelf, a bookmark still in it, a folded piece of yellow construction paper with a star drawn on it in red crayon. He sat in the living room for a long time. He had not called yet. He told himself he was giving it a day, that Nora might have had a family matter, that there was a reasonable explanation that didn't require him to examine what he was feeling too carefully. But he knew. The way you know certain things when you are 71 years old and have lived enough life to recognize the shape of a thing before it finishes forming. Preston had been here over the weekend. Preston had been alone in the apartment on Saturday afternoon while Harlan was at a specialist appointment. Harlan had come home to find his son reading in the living room, calm and ordinary, and they had eaten dinner and watched a documentary about the construction of the Golden Gate Bridge, which Harlan had suggested mostly because he thought Mari would like it, and then caught himself mid-thought. Preston had left Sunday evening. He had hugged Harlan at the door, a real hug, the kind they hadn't exchanged in years, long enough to mean something. Harlan had not known what to make of it. Now sitting in the quiet apartment on Monday evening, looking at the yellow bookmark in the bridge book, he thought he was beginning to understand. He called Nora's number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He did not leave a message. He sat by the window and watched the city move below him and thought about Preston's hug at the door. The particular quality of it. The way a person holds someone when they believe they are doing the right thing and cannot entirely convince themselves that it feels right. He called again Tuesday morning. Voicemail. Tuesday afternoon. Voicemail. He put the phone down and looked at the photograph on the desk. Eleanor at the wedding, laughing at something he'd said. He looked at Mari's family drawing beside it, the wheelchair with the gold star sticker, the son. He sat with both of them for a long time. On Wednesday morning, he called his doctor, not to make an appointment, to ask a question. His doctor, a straightforward man named Aldridge who had treated Harlan for 11 years and had the useful quality of being entirely impossible to alarm, picked up on the second ring. Harlan asked him directly, had anyone contacted his office recently regarding his cognitive health? Had there been any communication, any consultation, any inquiry from a family member about his mental state? A pause. Dr. Aldridge said no. He said Harlan's last full evaluation had been in February and everything was exactly as it should be for a man of his age and history. He asked if something had happened. Harlan said he was trying to establish a fact. Dr. Aldridge said the fact was established. Harlan thanked him and ended the call. He sat very still, not with anger. Anger was a thing that moved, that pushed outward, that needed somewhere to go. What Harlan felt was something quieter and heavier. The feeling of understanding something clearly that you had hoped in some part of yourself you were wrong about. His son had lied to Nora. He did not know the exact words Preston had used, but he knew the shape of what had happened, the way he knew the shape of a structural failure in a building. You didn't need to see the crack to understand that something had given way under a weight it wasn't designed to carry. Preston had been afraid. And afraid people in Harlan's experience did not always choose the right thing to do with their fear. He understood that. He did not yet know what to do with the understanding. The building across the skyline was finished. He noticed it that Wednesday afternoon. The crane was gone. The scaffolding was down. The curved glass facade caught the April light and held it the way he had designed it to hold it in 2017 when he was 64 and still believed his best work was ahead of him. He had designed that building to catch the late afternoon light specifically. The angle of the facade, the curvature, the type of glass, all of it calculated to produce a particular effect at around 4 o'clock when the sun came from the west at a specific low angle. It was 4:15. The building was doing exactly what he had designed it to do. He watched it for a long time. He thought about the fact that a building could do exactly what you designed it to do, Years after you had stopped being involved in a city that had moved on without you, that the work persisted even when the worker was absent. He thought about what he was trying to build now. Not a building. Something with different materials, harder to calculate, harder to draw to scale. He picked up his phone and called Preston. Preston answered on the first ring. He was back in New York. Harlan could hear the ambient sound of his son's apartment, the particular quiet of a high-floor space in a city of 8 million people. Harlan said, "I called Dr. Aldridge this morning." A pause. "Dad, I'm not going to ask you why." Harlan said, "I think I know why. What I'm going to ask you is to come back to Chicago this weekend. There are things I need to say to you that I don't want to say over the phone." Another pause. Longer. "All right," Preston said. "Thank you," Harlan said. He ended the call. Then he sat in the quiet apartment and thought about what he needed to say and how to say it, and whether the words that existed were adequate for the thing he was trying to communicate. He didn't think they were, but he had learned over 71 years that the words never felt adequate before you said them. The adequacy came later, if it came at all, in the space between what was said and what the other person chose to do with it. Preston arrived Saturday morning. Not evening as he usually did. Morning. Harlan heard the elevator and looked up from his coffee to find his son standing in the foyer in a flannel shirt and no tie, which was unusual enough that it registered. They sat in the living room. The building across the skyline was bright in the morning light. Harlan looked at his son, the dark hair going gray at the temples, now the slight shadows under his eyes that had been there since Eleanor's funeral and had never entirely left. 44 years old, the age Harlan had been when he designed his first major building. The age when a man starts to understand that the decisions he makes now will compound in ways he can't entirely foresee. He said, "I want to tell you something about the night your mother died." Preston went still. This was not what he had expected. "I've never told you the full version," Harlan said. "I told you the facts, that it was sudden, that I was in the next room, that she didn't suffer. Those things are all true. But I left out the part that I've been carrying." He paused. "I woke up at 4 in the morning," he said. "I don't know what woke me. I lay there for a moment and I had the specific feeling, the kind that doesn't come with a reason, just arrives, that I should go check on her, that something was different." He looked at his hands. "I didn't go," he said. "I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was being anxious. I went back to sleep." The room was very quiet. "When I woke up at 6 and went to her room, she was already gone. The doctor said it had happened sometime around 4. He looked at Preston. "I have lived with that for 2 years," he said. "Every day, the moment I decided not to go." Preston's jaw was tight. His eyes were bright. "Dad, I'm not telling you this for comfort," Harlan said gently. "I'm telling you because I understand what it means to carry something. I understand what it does to a person, how it makes them reach for control in places where they feel like they failed somewhere else." He let that settle. "You weren't there the night she died," Harlan said. "You were at a trial. You made a choice that you've been paying for since the funeral. I have never blamed you for it. I want you to hear that clearly. I have never blamed you for it." Preston looked at the floor. "But you cannot spend the rest of your life making it up to me by controlling what I'm allowed to have," Harlan said. "That's not love. That's guilt trying to look like love. And I think somewhere in you, you know the difference." The silence that followed was long. Not the silence of a conversation that had ended. The silence of something that had been opened and was now exposed to air for the first time. Preston looked up. His eyes were wet. He didn't try to manage it. "I read the report," he said. "The investigator's report. Nora is exactly what she appears to be." "I know," Harlan said. "I knew it before I said what I said to her." He stopped. "I just kept looking at you in this apartment with them and thinking, what if this ends badly? What if she leaves and you're worse than before? What if I let something happen to you again?" "Again," Harlan said quietly. Preston closed his eyes. "I know," he said. "I know." Harlan moved his chair closer to his son, close enough to put a hand on his arm. "You didn't let anything happen to your mother," he said, "and you can't protect me from living. What you can do if you want to is be here for it." Preston put his hand over his father's. They sat like that for a moment. Two men in a quiet room with the morning light coming through the windows, the building across the way, catching the sun exactly as it had been designed to do. Preston said finally, "I need to fix what I did." "Yes," Harlan said. "You do." "Will she do? You think she'll—" "I don't know," Harlan said honestly. "That's up to her." He removed his hand and settled back. "But I'm going to go find out," he said. He didn't ask Clifton to drive him. He didn't call ahead. He pulled up the address from the information Clifton had found months ago when this had all begun, and he drove himself in the adapted vehicle that Eleanor had helped him choose 7 years ago in a parking lot in suburban Chicago, laughing because the salesman kept addressing all his questions to her instead of to Harlan. And Eleanor had finally said with perfect pleasantness, "He's the one buying the car. Perhaps try talking to him." He drove south through the Saturday morning city, past the neighborhoods that change character block by block the way cities do when you pay attention. Past corner stores and church parking lots and a school playground empty in the Saturday quiet. Past a stretch of the lake visible between buildings gray-blue and enormous. He found the building. A brick apartment complex, 4 stories maintained but modest. A buzzer panel at the front door with small handwritten labels beside each button. He pressed the button for 3B. Waited. A child's voice crackled through the speaker. "Hello?" "Mari," he said. "It's Mr. Harlan." A long pause, then a very loud, "Mama! Mama! It's Mr. Harlan from the intercom." He waited. Nora's voice came through. Quieter. Careful. "Harlan." "I'm sorry to arrive without calling," he said. "I called several times this week. I understand if you don't want to come down. But I'd like to talk to you, in whatever way works for you." A pause. "Give me 5 minutes," she said. He waited in the small lobby. There was a bulletin board on the wall with notices about a neighborhood watch meeting and a lost cat and a community garden sign-up for the spring. He read all of them. He heard the stairs before he heard her, the particular sound of someone descending quickly and then slowing deliberately near the bottom, composing themselves before they arrived. The door opened. Nora looked tired. The kind of tired that isn't about sleep. She was in weekend clothes, a gray sweater, dark jeans, her hair down, which he had rarely seen. She looked younger this way and somehow more serious. She held the door and looked at him. He held up the piece of paper in his hand. She looked at it. It was Marie's drawing. The one from the social studies assignment. The family. The wheelchair with the gold star sticker. The sun. "My family" in careful first-grade print. "I think this belongs to the artist," he said. "I should have sent it home with her. I kept it because I—" He stopped. "I should have sent it home with her." Nora looked at the drawing for a long moment. Then she looked at him. "What Preston told me," she said. "About your doctor. About what the doctor said." "There was no doctor," Harlan said. "I called Dr. Aldridge on Wednesday. There was no conversation, no recommendation, no concern. None of it was true." She already knew. He could see it in her face. She had known or suspected, and the knowing had not made it easier. "Why are you telling me this yourself?" she said. "Why not have Preston—" "Because it's my responsibility," he said. "He's my son. What he did because he was afraid for me. That doesn't make it right. But I'm not going to send him to fix it. I'm going to fix it." She studied him. The lobby was quiet. Somewhere above them, a door opened and closed. Outside, a car passed on the street, its radio briefly audible through the glass. "What does fixing it look like?" she said. "Honestly," he said, "I'm not entirely sure. I know what I want. I know what I think is right. But what you decide to do with that is not mine to determine." He held her gaze. "I am 71 years old," he said. "I have designed buildings that will stand for 100 years after I'm gone. I have been married to a woman who was the finest person I ever knew. I have sat in this chair for 7 years and watched the world move at a distance. And the 5 months that your daughter spent in that apartment were the first 5 months in 7 years that I felt like I was actually living in my life instead of watching it from the other side of the glass." He paused. "I'm not asking you to overlook what happened. I'm asking you to tell me what you need, and I will do my honest best to provide it." Nora was quiet for a long time. A long time. Then she said, "Mari hasn't stopped asking about you." He said nothing. "Every day," Nora said. "What is Mr. Harlan doing? Does Mr. Harlan know that bridges and tunnels are related too, because they both go through things instead of over them? She came home from school Tuesday with a question about the Hoover Dam, and she asked me to save it for you because she wanted to ask you herself. Harlan looked at the drawing in his hand. What's the question, he said. Nora almost smiled. Controlled it, but not entirely. Whether a dam counts as a bridge, she said, because it holds water back the same way a bridge holds weight. He considered this seriously. That's a genuinely interesting question, he said. I know, Nora said. She's a genuinely interesting person. They looked at each other. Preston needs to apologize to you directly, Harlan said. Not through me. I want you to know that I've told him that. All right. And I want you to take whatever time you need. There's no pressure. There's no timeline. She nodded slowly. Then she said, wait here. She went back up the stairs. He waited. The bulletin board, the lost cat notice, the community garden sign-up. He heard the stairs again, faster this time, not Nora's pace. The door burst open. Marigold, still in pajamas, hair untamed, face entirely open. She stopped in front of his wheelchair and looked at him with those direct, completely unself-conscious eyes that had first found him at a window in October in a room full of people who had all looked away. Does a dam count as a bridge? She said. He looked at her. I've been thinking about that, he said. Can I tell you what I think? She nodded. A bridge takes you over something, he said. A dam holds something so it can be useful. They're related, but a dam is its own thing. A dam doesn't just cross a problem, it changes the problem into something else entirely. Mari thought about this with her whole face. It makes the river into a lake, she said. Exactly. She considered the full weight of this. Then she looked at the wheelchair, at the gold star sticker and the pink flower and the green turtle who was good at carrying things and still being okay. She put her hand on the side panel gently, the way you touch something you've missed. Are you coming back? She said. He looked at her hand on the side of his chair. He looked up at Nora standing in the doorway at the top of the small lobby stairs, watching. That depends on your mother, he said. Mari turned and looked at Nora with complete confidence. Nora looked at her daughter's hand on the wheelchair, at the drawing Harlan was still holding, at the man sitting in the lobby of her building on a Saturday morning who had driven himself across the city to deliver a child's drawing in person. She came down the stairs. She sat down on the bench beside the door, the only available seat in the small lobby, so that she was at his level. Preston calls me directly, she said, not through you. Agreed. And Mari's school continues regardless of how this goes. That was never conditional, he said. That was for her. Nora looked at him carefully, the way she looked when she was deciding whether to trust something. Monday, she said. We'll come Monday. He exhaled slowly. Not with relief exactly, with something more like the feeling of a structure settling, all the pieces moving into their correct positions under the proper load. Thank you, he said. Mari, who had been following this exchange with great seriousness, announced, I'm going to put another sticker on. A new one. Because you've been gone. That seems appropriate, Harlan said. Preston called Nora on Sunday evening. Harlan did not know what was said. He had told Preston the call needed to happen and then had removed himself entirely from the mechanics of it. Some things had to be done without a witness. Some apologies needed space to be imperfect. He only knew from the slight shift in Nora's expression when she arrived Monday morning that something had been given and received. Not resolved completely, some things couldn't be resolved in a single phone call. But given and received. That was enough to begin. Mari added 2 stickers that Monday, a red star and a small blue whale, which she explained was there because whales traveled very long distances and always found their way. Harlan held his chair still while she applied them with her usual ceremony. When she was done, she stepped back and assessed the full collection. The pink flower, the gold star, the green turtle, the red star, the blue whale. Better, she said. Definitely better, he agreed. The weeks after that moved differently than the weeks before. Not faster, not slower, just more present. The way time moves when you are paying attention to it instead of enduring it. Preston flew in the following weekend. He arrived with the specific energy of a man who has decided to do something and is nervous about doing it. He sat at the kitchen table with Nora and talked for 40 minutes, while Harlan deliberately stayed in his study and read the same paragraph of a book about the Chicago River 7 times. He did not hear what was said. When he came out, Mari was showing Preston the bridge book explaining the difference between suspension bridges and cable-stayed bridges with a confidence that suggested she had been preparing this particular lecture for some time. Preston was listening, not with the polite attention of an adult performing interest for a child, with actual interest. Harlan poured himself a cup of coffee and stood in the kitchen doorway and watched his son lean over the bridge book and ask Mari a question, a real question, not a test question, and watch Mari answer it without looking up. He thought about Eleanor. He thought about the way she would have found this moment and held it up to the light. He thought about the voice on the phone the evening of the accident, asking about salmon or chicken for dinner, and how that ordinary question had become the last ordinary thing, and how he had learned slowly over 7 years that ordinary things were not ordinary at all. That they were the whole thing, actually. That the ordinary moments were what a life was made of, and the grand ones were just punctuation. He drank his coffee. Outside, the May light was doing something specific to the building across the way, catching the glass at an angle he hadn't seen before. A morning angle. A late spring angle. The building had been built for many light conditions, but he hadn't been watching at this particular hour on this particular kind of morning, and so this version of it was new. You could know a thing for years, he thought, and still find new versions of it. On a Saturday in June, Harlan went to his desk and opened the large flat drawer at the bottom, the one that held his drafting paper untouched for 7 years. He took out a sheet. He picked up a pencil. He sat for a moment with the pencil in his hand, feeling the familiar weight of it, the particular way it balanced between his fingers. The muscle memory was still there. 7 years and still there. He began to draw. Not a commission, not a concept for a client. A house. Small. Single story, no stairs. Wide doorways throughout. A long back porch facing west to catch the evening light. A kitchen with lower countertops and wide corridors. A room in the back with a large window facing a garden, bookshelves along one wall, a reading chair near the glass. A yard with a tree. Room under the tree for a swing. He worked slowly. He made mistakes and corrected them. He tried a roofline 3 different ways before finding the one that felt right. He hadn't drawn in 7 years, and his hands knew it. The lines were slightly less certain than they used to be, slightly less automatic. That was fine. He wasn't drawing for precision. He was drawing to find out what he was thinking. He worked for 2 hours. When he looked up, the afternoon light had shifted entirely, and he had 3 pages of drawings, and his coffee had gone cold. Nora knocked on the open study door. She was holding the afternoon's coffee. She had learned to bring a second cup around 3 o'clock, which was when he tended to forget the first one. She set it on the desk and glanced at the drawings. He didn't move to cover them. She looked at the plans for a long moment. The low countertops, the wide doorways, the yard with the tree. "What is that?" she said. He picked up the pencil. "A place," he said, "where there's room for all of us." She looked at him, not with surprise, with the expression of a person who is hearing something they have already been thinking but hadn't said. "Harlan, I'm not asking for an answer today," he said. "I'm telling you what I've been working out. You can think about it for as long as you need." She looked at the drawings again, at the swing under the tree, at the reading room with the garden window, at the wide doorways that would work for anyone regardless of how they moved through the world. "Mari would destroy that garden," she said finally. "I'm counting on it," he said. She almost laughed. She did laugh, actually, a real one, surprised out of her. She picked up her coffee and stood in the doorway for a moment. "It's a good drawing," she said. "It's a start," he said. "Drawings are always just the start." She nodded and went back to the kitchen. He looked at the plans on his desk. Then he picked up the pencil and made one small addition. In the front of the house near the door, he sketched a flagpole. Small, simple. So people know someone's home. That evening, the 3 of them sat on the terrace. It was the first genuinely warm evening of the summer, the kind that arrives in Chicago after a long spring and feels like something promised finally delivered. The city below was lit and moving. The lake caught the last of the light in the west and held it longer than everything else. Mari was lying on her back on the terrace rug, looking up at the sky, which had gone from blue to lavender, to the particular deep color it gets just before the stars appear. Nora sat in the other chair. Harlan sat at the edge of the terrace looking out at the city. He looked at the building across the way. Dark now, the workday done, the offices emptied. He could see the shape of it against the sky, the curve of the glass facade, The proportions he had spent months getting right back in 2017 when he was 64 and believed the work was just beginning. In a way, it had been, just not the work he thought. Mari said from the ground, "Mr. Harlan." "Yes." "If you could build anything," she said, "anything at all, what would you build?" He thought about it. He thought about the 43 buildings, the hospitals and libraries and office towers, the years of clients and consultations, and the particular satisfaction of watching a design become a physical thing in the world. He thought about the flat drawer full of drafting paper and the drawing on his desk and the flagpole he had added at the end. "I'm working on it," he said. Mari accepted this as a complete answer, which it was. The sky deepened. The first stars appeared. None of them moved to go inside. This was the part that nobody had told him about. Not the grief counselors, not the specialists, not the friends who had shown up in the months after Eleanor died with food and careful words and the best intentions. Nobody had told him that it was possible at 71 to sit on a terrace in the June dark and feel the specific, unmistakable sensation of a life that was not behind you, not finished, not winding down, actually genuinely quietly happening. He thought about Eleanor at 22, standing on a table in a dining hall in Wisconsin, refusing to be embarrassed. He thought about her voice on the phone asking about salmon or chicken. He thought about the cabinet she had lowered 6 inches without being asked, and the pot of thyme on the kitchen windowsill that he had managed somehow to keep alive. He thought about a song playing in a crowded room in October, a melody he had almost forgotten the name of. A 5-year-old girl standing beside him at a window, completely unafraid. "Do you know what this song is called?" Such a small question. Such an enormous answer. He looked out at the city, at the 43 buildings somewhere in that skyline, doing exactly what they had been designed to do, holding the weight of other people's ordinary days. And he felt something that he recognized after a long time of not feeling it as gratitude. Not the grateful feeling of someone who has been saved. The grateful feeling of someone who has been found. There is a thing that happens to men who spend their lives building outward. They get very good at designing spaces for other people's lives. They learn the load-bearing requirements of hospitals and libraries and office towers. They learn how light moves, how weight distributes, how structure creates possibility. And sometimes they forget to turn the pencil around. Sometimes it takes a long time, and a song and a child and a woman who stayed when she had every reason not to remember that the most important blueprint is the one you draw for yourself. Not the grand design, the small one. The house with the wide doorways and the reading room and the yard with a swing under a tree. The place where someone knows you're home.